I have good news and I have bad news. Let's start with the bad news. The bad news is it is now 4:30. We are half an hour late. And the good news is that I will not be giving my introductory remarks so that we can save time. The other bad news is that we'll have other bad and good news. And the other bad news is that we will still be a little late. And I will ask our speakers to be briefer or faster than what they had thought, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And the good news is that the debate just before paved the way for this discussion, for this conversation. And I thought it was an excellent introduction for our theme here today. And we are going to continue the debate on what was said during the day. We will talk about what can be done, what should be done to help Palestinians, but also to better organize our work and resist the pressures that are being exerted on us, pressures that we have to resist. And we know that important means are being used to quell our dissent. Now, I'm going to start with Clémentine Autain, elected representative. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to try to be brief. I would like to bring my testimony as a politician when you take position for peace in this region, a war-torn region, for a very long time. And tell us, please, how one should resist these pressures. Oh, don't worry. I'll essentially be talking about that. Now, I went to Palestine once, 8 years ago, and at the time, I was working for France Culture, for a French radio channel. We had a tour. It was at the time where the wall was being built, and it was really an eye-opener during my political construction. Of course, I was pro-Palestinian traditionally, but I had never seen that reality, and it was quite a shock to see the reality. And as I had this show every week, I did the same thing. I gave the description of the situation I had just been witness to over the phone, and I did it in a very clear manner. I was talking about water, how the settlers had all the water and the pools, the checkpoints. And if I have to be completely honest, I was also very pregnant, so I was quite emotional. And this was streamed live. France Culture was not aware of the content, and this was the first time that I had to cope with these pressures, and I was told that at France Culture that this was unacceptable, and if I did it again, I would have to leave and I would be made redundant. So I don't want to name anyone within the hierarchy because this was not an official declaration or a notification. No, this was a comment that was made by several people. I was told that that particular program was not welcome. However, it was quite listened to by a certain number of people. So this was the first time that pressure was exerted on me. Now, of course, every time one takes position, then you are accused of anti-Semitism. And on social networks, it does really get out of hand. I am very careful on on the social networks in order to express my position or my political position when there is an anti-Semitic act. And every time I tweet about it, I have messages about me being anti-Semitic because I express my support for the Palestinian people. So as you can see, it's quite difficult. I think that one must stand strong, especially when you know that your struggle is just. And a few months ago, this is the second example, we had organized another trip to Palestine with a delegation, an organization called AGPF. It's an organization working on twinning cities in the West Bank and in France. And they had organized a trip with elected representatives. And we had also thought of visiting Marwan Barghouti in jail in order to express our solidarity and our support. And that is when things really got out of hand because the Israeli government has changed somewhat. We are now faced with a far-right government with authoritarian methods. And there was a ban that was issued against myself, against Pascal Durand, and other members, elected representatives from the Communist Party. We were told that we were not Israel's friends. We were told that we shouldn't take the plane, so it was quite violent. In France, the pressure was quite difficult to handle. And once again, the challenge is different with this far right-wing government. And now the question is, what should we do? So first, we turned to the French authorities and said, oh, so what do we do now? This is incredible. This is a diplomatic and political issue. It is incredible that a French elected representative cannot go to Israel because we don't even know why. It's incredible. It was very difficult, especially to know how to handle the pressure. And at the time, and even now, it seems that we still don't have the strategy to be able to fight in this particular environment. And we ended up giving up on the trip. It was a collective decision, and because there were many of us, and I don't think that not going there is a viable response. We can't do this because this cannot work as a response to pressure. However, if we don't anticipate our reaction, if we don't organize and mobilize our reaction, if there is a division within the group, well, it can be a problem, and we were really taken by surprise. And now in France, there is an elected representative, Mayor Habib. Oh, I can see that you all know him very well. We are both at the same commission, and I have to say that we do have some somewhat heated conversations. And I have to say that, so it's a commission on foreign affairs, on every topic, he always talks about Israel and Palestine. And every time he does, then I respond. So we've had, as I said, a few heated debates, and notably on the fact that Marwan Barghouti, according to Mayor Habib, is not a political prisoner. He is a terrorist. I was accused by this man of being an anti-Semitic person. And this is difficult pressure that we have to resist, and it's part of the political debate as it exists today. So as I said, we try to resist. We did have a video that was filmed with Elsa Faucillon, my colleague, especially when Trump made his unilateral decision on Jerusalem, and we filmed our video. It was viral. It had hundreds of thousands of views on social networks, and I think that, yes, this is also how resistance is built up. I am an elected representative of a very of a difficult neighborhood and a difficult area near Paris, and I am convinced that we have to be able to find a solution to this problem for the Palestinians and for Israelis, of course. But if in France we want to make things better in these suburbs and in these difficult neighborhoods, symbolically at least, and if we want to really fight against anti-Semitism, then it is part of our political debate here in France. So I really think that we have to continue expressing our support. Now, for the last episode of the Pressure series, I went and participated on a show on E24 News, which is an Israeli channel. I went there. It was very difficult. I was bombarded with questions, and the journalist, Madame Cabana, kept interrupting me all the time. She kept asking me, is Israel a democracy? Is Israel a democracy? She kept saying, oh, so you're a supporter of the Palestinians, and so on and so forth. And one has to resist in the face of this. In this situation, there isn't a symmetry because there are those who dominate and those who are dominated. And there is a point in which we completely forgot that there was this domination on one side. And this was the case with the IRA and the Irish conflict. And in France, we have to be very careful and make sure that this issue doesn't turn into something about a fight between two parties. Oh, they've been fighting for such a long time. There's nothing we can do about it, and so on and so forth. And this is a wrong interpretation. There is an occupier, there are settlers, and if we don't present things as such, I don't see how we can move forward. So we need to resist this pressure, which means that we need to be stronger and we need to build up our strength in a very different context. And this different context, it's linked with the new Israeli government and is also linked with the situation in France. And somebody like Manuel Valls was very harmful for the French situation. So if I take a picture with Marwan Barghouti, then I am a terrorist. But if Manuel Valls is side by side with a far-right minister from Israel, then there's no issue at all. That's completely fine. No one cares. So this situation needs to be analyzed, and this power balance needs to be analyzed in depth. We have to resist the pressure, and we have to remind that our struggles are struggles which want to lead to emancipation and independence for Palestinians and for all peoples, a fight against racism. And I think that if we remind this every time, then we will be stronger and we should ultimately win. Thank you.
Ivar Ekeland, si vous voulez bien.
Ivar Ekeland, who was the chair of the Paris Dauphine University. Good afternoon. Now, firstly, on a more personal note, I would say that this struggle is a struggle that has a psychological impact. Because if you talk about nuclear issues, for example, well, no one is going to hold a grudge against you, really. Well, maybe they will tell you that you're insane, but on this conflict, on this issue, you will be branded as an anti-Semite. And this is something that we reflect upon. We wonder whether we have the right of saying this or that. And we have to be able to overcome this, you know, because you don't want to have to say that you're Jewish or have to say that your parents were a resistance during the Second World War to be able to express these arguments. You should be able to do so regardless. Now, I will tell you what worked in my environment, in my field. In 1992, I was the chair of the Paris Dauphine University, and with two other colleagues from Orsay and from Bercy, both chairs, we went to Palestine and we went to visit chairs of universities over there. We went there because we observed that the entire Palestinian system had been completely siloed for 4 years, closed up. What I mean is that the doors to the universities were closed, literally, which means that for 4 years, classes were given in apartments. Palestinians could not go to university. We went to see the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we went to see the universities, and we visited all of these people. And in fact, this was just before the Oslo Agreement. The president of the French Republic was François Mitterrand, and he expected for there to be an evolution. And so there were investments that were made vis-a-vis the Palestinian elite. And what worked was cooperating with Palestinian universities very clearly. So first we started with a tripartite cooperation. We would have one Israeli partner, a Palestinian partner, and a French partner. Now, because Palestinians could not go into Israel, well, they could, but they would have to be there before 10 in the morning and leave after 5 p.m., so that was not possible. So we understood very quickly that there would have to be a bilateral cooperation between a Palestinian university and a French university. So we had French academics who went to Birzeit and they put up curriculums. And there was, in particular, a cooperation between the technical department, IT departments of universities in France and in Palestine. And this worked pretty well. And it worked because it was quite neutral, if you will. No political position was taken. It was simply the fact that we were sending professors to give classes elsewhere. It worked very well. There was no political problem. Israelis weren't very happy about it. But when we went there, I think it's helpful to remind you that at the time, Palestinians didn't have the right to teach medicine or to teach law. In any case, we were able to do this. We worked with the French consulate in Jerusalem. They were very helpful. And it was kind of an underground movement because it wasn't really political. And there was no emotional burden, the emotional burden that I was talking about a few minutes ago. In 2009, we founded an organization called l'Ordip, AURDIP. It is an organization of academics for the respect of human rights in Palestine. The purpose is to raise awareness, to defend human rights, and support Palestinian universities. And maybe we were naive, but as academics, we thought that we would be able to go to universities and organize debates and conferences for pedagogical purposes. It wasn't about boycott at the time. It was about having debates on the situation in Palestine. Great. We were never able to do so. It was always the same thing. A request would be issued in a university And you all remember the case of Stéphane Hessel, whose conference was banned a few years ago. Now, either the request is rejected, and once again, this isn't a request from the outside. It isn't our organization requesting this. No, it was professors or students from the university requesting to have this debate. So either you had the chair of the university refuse immediately, or you would have the chair of the university accept it, and 3 or 4 days before the event, it would be cancelled, and we would be told that, oh, we have security issues, so we have to cancel. Now, of course, there are security and safety issues. I remember a few years ago, there was a meeting at La Sorbonne. Dominique Vidal was there. He was giving a lecture, and it was interrupted by groups from the League of Défense Juive and the Bétar organization. And I remember that tear gas was, they used tear gas in the room, and you had said at the time that they were using tear gas, if I remember correctly, right? Yes. So yes, there are security issues. But one can always make sure they check who comes into the room, and it's still a form of censorship when you ban an event or you cancel an event because of security or so-called security issues. Now I would like to talk about what happened with Stéphane Hessel, may he rest in peace. Leila Shahid and Stéphane Hessel, two respected academics, as well as Nurit Peled and yet other Israeli academics and people, well, very respected and important people, if I may say so. And the chair of this particular school and of this particular university, the students actually went to court in order for this meeting to be held, and the court confirmed that they did have the right to hold the meeting, but then it was appealed. And on the website of the CRIF, the president or the chair of the CRIF thanked Valérie Pécresse and the chairmanship of Paris University, who were contacted and who reacted immediately. So this, I think, can be described as a pressure. A member of the audience has spoken, but not into a mic, so we cannot interpret what they said. So what happened afterwards was that we all met that day. It was a really cold day, and we met outside and protested. This was completely outrageous. And in 2010, we had the same problem with the Paris University, with the Paris University Paris 6. At the time, I wrote to the chair of the chair of the university as the chair of the organization. And I had written to the chair, and the chair had responded that they had decided to cancel this event for security purposes. I believe that if we had had a meeting on Brexit, that would not have been the response, if you see what I mean. So sometimes we are able to organize events, and notably certain French universities, we have conferences or symposiums, but I have to say that we were never able to have a conference for the students of a university, in a given university, no matter what the topic is, if it's about Israel and Palestine. So where do we go from here? Well, we have to change tactics. We have to change our strategy. Ivar, 2 minutes, please. Okay, I'll give it my best shot. What we try to do is turn to the European Union. We have a website, a lot of clicks, because of what you just said before. We need to have access to the facts, and the facts need to be stated. It has been 50 years now that these crimes have been going on, but they are still ongoing. We also have international partnerships, and the BRICUP in the UK, and the relations and our alliances with our partners really lead us to think about where we are in France, because in the UK and in the US, universities and campuses are very active, students are very active, there are lots of conferences, lots of lectures, and trade unions are extremely active. But that is not the case in France. Why? Why? I would like to ask that question. Is it because of the Islamophobia? Is it because we used to have colonies, that we were in a former colonialist country? I don't know. But this issue should lead us to reflect on what kind of country we live in. Why can't we talk about this? It goes way beyond Israel and Palestine. We have groups, swaths of the population who can't talk to each other, and this is a very serious matter for France. Okay, Renée Le Mignot, could you please take the floor? Co-chair of the MRAP organization. The MRAP is an organization that fights against racism. We were the target of attacks by the League of the Jewish Defense. We were physically attacked, actually. Like other activists, we also were the targets of death threats. We have had to lodge a complaint against Arnaud Klarsfeld, who had said on TV, oh, right, the MRAP who calls for the death of Jewish people. So we had to go to court and lodge a complaint against this man. Now, yes, there was a demonstration where such slogans were uttered. And at the time, the organizers of the demonstration had suspended and stopped the demonstration in order to get rid of those elements precisely. And that same evening, one of our lawyers had lodged a complaint against the demonstrators who had pronounced these words. But I'm just giving you an example of what could happen to you, because it happened to us. Our organization is an offshoot of the MNCR. It was created in 1942 to save Jewish children from deportation. It was made up of resistance, of which Charles Palin, resistance and survivors. And this is why, for us, being accused of anti-Semitism is particularly painful. In 1977, the Congress decided to change its name, and we became the MRAP, the Movement Against Racism. It is a French acronym. Of course, all of our opponents accused us of letting go of the fight against anti-Semitism, but in reality, the reason why we changed our name was to better defend the universality of the fight against racism. We have wanted to express that we refused the hierarchy of different types of racism, and it's the universality that we apply when we defend the rights of the Palestinian people. It is the rights of people as it is enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, and it is in accordance with this charter that we defend the right of Palestinians. Now, for today's debate and how we should handle these mounting pressures, I would say that the best answer we can provide is to answer with the truth. What is happening in Palestine is not a war between the Jewish and the Arabs. It is a colonialist war waged by the fourth military power in the world against the Palestinian people. We have to say this once and again. And this is how we will be able to break this circle of Arabs versus Jews and Jews versus Arabs. No, we have to keep saying that this is a colonialist issue. We have to also insist on how Israel is treated differently. For the past 15 days, I have been demonstrating and expressing myself against the intervention in Turkey. And we have said the following things. We have accused Erdogan of being a murderer, but no one would say that that's a manifestation of Islamophobia. No one would say that we are being racist against the Turkish people. So why the double standards? Why would we have that attitude towards Israel? And I think that we need to shed light every time on this specific attitude that there is towards Israel on this double standards, and I think this will help us move forward. There's also the concept of colonialism. On the 15th of February 2017, Emmanuel Macron said the following on an Algerian TV channel: colonization is a crime against humanity. I completely agree with Macron for once in my life. Now, yes, I completely agree, provided that this holds for all colonizers. If we keep in mind Emmanuel Macron's words, then opposing Israeli policies means that we are opposing a crime against humanity. And if that means being anti-Semitic, it means that we have a real problem here. I believe that there's another very important issue. I think that we should remind constantly that there are people who in Israel are fighting courageously against Israeli policies. Either if we're talking about refusniks who refuse to serve in the military, or whether we're talking about the Israeli youth who chain themselves to olive trees so that they're not uprooted. We have to remind the world that this opposition exists and that what we are condemning is a policy and a government, and that in a democracy, criticizing the policy of a state is a right. It is not a form of racism. And now I'd like to quote Nourit Peled. We all know that she lost her 14-year-old daughter in the event of an attack committed by a Palestinian. She says, there are two voices in Israel, the official, repressive, authoritarian, and racist voice, which has trapped a people in a ghetto. And this is the path of death. And then there is the path of our heroes, the path of dialogue, the path of saying no to violence, the path of peace. They have chosen to not lose their humanity, and they have taken the risk of becoming pariahs in their own homes. Some of them are incarcerated, and they are the true unsung heroes of Israel. We are by their side. We are by the side of the true heroes of Israel, and that cannot be associated with anti-Semitism. Now to get back to the BDS campaign. I would like to quote an excerpt from a request for the authorization of a demonstration by the AFPS. It was a demonstration to demand the liberation of Salah Amouri. It was in November. I've signed many requests for authorization, and I had never seen such a comment. It is recalled, says the comment, that calling for boycott of Israeli goods and products represents a call for hatred against the people because of their origin. As a consequence, any call for the boycott of Israeli products and goods during the demonstration will or can lead to legal proceedings. I had never read such a thing. It was the first time. So the best answer we can bring to this is fighting against impunity, and I will wrap it up there. We have to fight against the impunity, which means that we have to replace the law of the jungle by rights and legislation. And what we are doing when we fight for Palestinians is fighting for law, fighting for justice, fighting for peace. And we have to constantly insist on this, because I think that this can really defeat our opponents. Thank you. Now I will give the floor to Alain Bosc, representing CIMAD at the Platform for Peace in Palestine. Thank you. I will try to be brief. We have observed that our work and our action as organizations defending human rights is facing all sorts of hurdles and delegitimization operations. And this is a trend which is being exacerbated, and notably with the law that was adopted on the transparency of NGOs in July 2016, also exacerbated with the publication of a list of 20 international NGOs which are now banned from entry in Israel. This blacklist, in fact, is this blacklist followed an act which was adopted on the 6th of March 2017 by the Knesset, which banned any person having called for the boycott of the State of Israel from entering the territory. So we are now in a context of a witch hunt, and this isn't a coincidence, because the first NGOs who have to suffer the consequences are the Palestinian NGOs, such as Al-Haq, and Mr. Shawad Jabari knows this. Another target of these attacks are the NGOs, the Israeli NGOs defending human rights. There is also another organization playing a very important role in these pressures in Israel and in the world, and it's Ngo Monitor. So this is an organization which aims to promoting the transparency of NGOs for the defense of human rights. But actually, Ngo Monitor defends the positions of the Israeli government by delegitimizing any NGO opposing occupation. Apparently, Ngo Monitor has no links with governments, but the founder of Ngo Monitor was an advisor for the cabinet of the Israeli Prime Minister. This organization is increasingly influent and increases its pressure on governments in the world so that they no longer fund certain organizations. Ngo Monitor states that it cooperates with different ministers in Israel, and it is clear that it did have an influence at the moment in which the Act on the Financial Transparency of NGOs was adopted. Now, Ngo Monitor states that it does not have funds from the Israeli state. However, they do have private funds, and they also have the so-called specific fund to fight against the delegitimization of the state of Israel. And 50% of the fund is funded by the Israeli state. This organization now has branches in Brussels, in the European Union, in Washington, but also in the UN. Ngo Monitor says it is proud to be able to have contributed to the non-publication of firms having an activity in the settlements or in the occupied territories. They have also participated in other initiatives, and notably in Switzerland. When you go on the website of Ngo Monitor, you can see that its propaganda is clearly a one-way propaganda. It attacks people, individuals. It insinuates accusations. Everything is used in order to harm the reputation of organizations and individuals. And some targets are particularly attacked, such as AFD in France. It is the French Agency for Development, and they are under very strong pressures from this NGO Monitor. So we have to be aware of this environment. We have to be aware of the existence of these threats, and we have to once again shed light on the importance of the role played by our organizations to defend human rights and educate for development and peace.
C'est ce que j'appelle une intervention remarquable.
So that's a remarkable contribution. And the last of our speakers today is Pascal Durand. He is a European Member of Parliament, and recently he has had some problems which he will probably talk about when he could not enter Israel, where he was going, or among other things, to meet Marwan Barghouti and Salah Amouri. Thank you very much. I'm not really here to talk about myself, and I went there with Clémentine and other people. I think that not being able to enter Israel is first and foremost difficult for people living there. Because if we end up refusing national and European MPs, and I remind everybody that the European Union is the first economic partner of Israel. So if we are now banned from getting into the territory, that speaks volumes about the pressure and suffering of people in their daily lives there. So we try to maintain the light of the light of hope amongst people that are not just calling to arms. So I think that this is quite difficult, and I just want to quote Jaurès, who said that whomever your side, it's important to always try and be calm and reasoned when we talk about this issue. I don't think we need to spend too much time here. We agree that we need to act, but how should we act? I speak now keeping in mind all our Palestinian brothers and sisters living there and all those living in Israel defending peace. The reality, however, today is that we are losing this fight, because the reality is that other conflicts exist now and made the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts redundant in a way, because Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, countries where hundreds of thousands of millions of people are suffering and which we cannot forget. All these conflicts have now pushed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict down at the bottom of the list, and the Israeli government, Mr. Netanyahu government, but other governments before him, used that to put more and more pressure on the population that feels that it's abundant today. We talked about the way other countries have been able to help the Palestinian cause. But I would like for us to look at the European Union, at France, because the question is not just to look at what's happening, but also how can we resist and how to make sure that millions of people could suffer less tomorrow. And I think we all agree on that. Our commitment, be they political or in public organizations, are all motivated by the same thing. We want to lessen the sufferings of people in the world. And there are many types of answers. I think before something very just was said, Israel thinks it's a state outside of the legislation, or outside of law and time. Israel does not really want to be held accountable to the international community, even though it is the international community who created the country. Because we said it again and again, it's not God or a prophet that created the country, but it's the UN. It's the international community which created this state. And this state now refuses to be held accountable. And we may have different answers to that, but the international community today let Israel keep acting the way it does in impunity. So the first thing that we need to do is to answer, to provide a response to this state of non-right by the defense of the rule of law. And how do we defend the rule of law? Well, and that is why Israel is scared. It's not because we demonstrate. It's merely because we remind them that the agreement linking Israel and the European Union has disposed in its Article 2 that it can be suppressed if one of the two parties violates the human rights. And we won't be able to fight and to win the fight on the security questions. Right now, we've lost that fight. Every time we talk about the Israeli bombs on the civil society, they come back at us with this throwing of stones. So this fight cannot be won today. But saying that the Palestinian population does not have access to water, that they do not have access to medicines, to healthcare, that they do not have access to education, that is a violation of human rights. And nothing can be said against these facts. You can use the security question to say that a child cannot have access to education or an elderly person cannot have access to healthcare. This is something which, the only aim of these decisions is to push the Palestinians out of the country. Because we talk a lot about South Africa, but what is happening actually in Palestine is much more closer to what happened to the Native Americans. The aim is to make them leave the country. It's what the Israeli government wants, because they want to colonize this territory, as we've said, but they want to do so very calmly. And if they want to do so very calmly, they need this civil population to leave, this population that are resisting and trying to hold on to their territories. So our role, and that is what I try to do, and I'm criticized, attacked, insulted because of that. This is just a parenthesis. But a few days ago, when I took the floor at the European Parliament to ask Israel to pay damages to the European Union for all the destruction of infrastructure that we are now paying for, all these infrastructures helping NGOs, doctors, I'm not even talking about schools. When I said that, I received a call from the Fatah who said, bravo, congratulations for your courage for taking the floor at the European Parliament. But what is the world we are living now in when me living very quietly in a democracy? Okay, we could criticize the European democracy, but that's not our topic today. So how come when I live in this state respecting the rule of law very quietly, and how is it possible that people living in Palestine, that they could call me to tell me that I'm being brave by calling on Israel to pay because they destroy infrastructure that we are paying for? And I should be brave for that? No, that's not right. It's all the other ones that need to be shamed. All those talking about democracy, freedom, principles, human rights principle, all those people should be ashamed of themselves, because when we talk about Palestinians, they look away. And that is the answer we can provide, because on that point, on the question of the human rights, on the fact that there are laws that we need to respect, and all states should respect these rights, all states that are part of the international community should respect these rights. That is the argument we should use. And Israel should be denounced as a state with a right and far-right government. Israel is a state which does not respect the international rights, international law, and does not even respect the agreement passed between the EU and Israel. And I will keep saying that our agreement between the European Union and Israel should be stopped, because as long as the Israel will violate the rights of people living in their territories, as long as Israel will keep attributing 4/5 of the water resources to the Israeli populations in the colonies, as long as the settlements, as long as these situations will remain the same, I will keep denouncing it. And I will just conclude by saying that on the question of settlements, we have a very important tool that we could use. The European Union voted many times the fact that it is forbidden to import products made in the settlements under the name of products made in Israel. For many rights, this has been voted by the European Parliament. A vast majority voted that resolution, and the Commission took it on. So that means that the French state and all states are now being accomplice to something illegal when they let products, stamped products made in Israel, into their market when those products are actually produced in the settlements. So that's where we should act. We need to put pressure on the French government and all European nations to make sure that law will be respected, and also respected by Mr. Netanyahu. And that is something that we will need to keep saying. Make sure that when Mr. Macron welcomes Mr. Netanyahu, he won't be, to make sure that he will not keep saying, my dear friend. We need to make sure that no dictators, no heads of state violating human rights be welcomed that way in France. And we need to say that we cannot be accomplice to the policies implemented by Mr. Netanyahu, neither in the settlements nor in the importation sector. So before we followed, we still have 10 minutes. 8? Okay, 8 minutes. So we'll take 2 or 3 questions. I just want to start off with one idea, and then I will keep let the room talk.
C'est vrai en Israël, c'est vrai.
I would say that in Israel, in the United States, most of the young people that I know, and I insist on the youth, because this is what we're talking about, how to engage the youth. I would say that most young people who engage don't do so on a political position. the one-state solution, the two-state solution, that's not what engages them. No. What engages them are moral and ethical positions. What's going to engage them is not giving them a list of victims. No, what is going to engage them is the lands that are confiscated. It is the wells of water that are confiscated, because these are issues of human rights, of democratic rights, and these are the issues that enable us to engage with the youth. I'm going to give you an example. There was an initiative a few months ago, 3 to 4 months ago, and 100 persons, Jewish and non-Jewish, said publicly that they were pro-BDS. But others also said that they were hostile to the idea of boycotting Israel. However, they all agreed on the fact that a ban on calling for boycott is unimaginable, because what's at stake here is our freedom as a democracy. In the United States, you can't repress the expression of an opinion. And this is an example of a possible gateway to reach out to the youth, defending freedom of expression and defending these essential rights in order to mobilize the youth. I think I spoke a little too much. Now I will give you the floor, you in the audience. We will take 2 questions in the room. So this exchange is can't be heard by the interpreters, so cannot be interpreted. Our apologies. Oh, Clémentine wanted to add something. I'll give a minute to each person. Okay, I will change my question into a comment so that it doesn't call for an answer. I was really shocked by what was said by Clémentine and Pascal on MPs who were not able to access Palestinian and Israeli territories. They were not able to meet with Palestinians. And then there was this list of 20 organizations which were banned: Jewish Voice for Peace, the AFPS, BDS France, and so on and so forth. The French government was asked about this, and we asked them, what is your reaction to this list, to the ban on these organizations? And now I'm speaking to the English speakers. Please don't think 1 second that this is a problem of translation, because maybe the French will understand nothing about this answer. The answer was the following. The position of France is very well known. There is a ban on calling for boycott of a determined origin or a determined country of origin. And on the basis of this, and I don't know what that means precisely, we want NGOs to be able to access Palestinian and Israeli territories. So French-speaking people, you didn't understand anything. The English-speaking people, it's not a translation issue. This is non-translatable, really. And these are the responses that we get from our politicians. And it all boils down to this. This means that we are winning this battle, because they no longer have a credible response to bring to our questions on freedom of expression, on boycott, on all of these issues that we work on. I'm going to stop now, because I would actually need an entire day to make my point, but you got my message. What I wanted to say was that, of course, we meet on a regular basis. We all agree on these issues. We know this issue very well. So the question is, what can we do today? Where can we go from here? Is there an opportunity with Trump and his positions. Maybe Europe can play a role currently in this new political no man's land. Currently, Trump has been attacking organizations in the United States. He has been attacking UNESCO. He has been attacking UNRWA, which is a tragedy for Gaza. So maybe now is the time for us to have a new action towards our authorities. Maybe it is now the moment to ask our authorities to do something completely new. And maybe that with the civil society, we could exert a pressure towards our authorities and say, okay, now Europe needs to handle this and change the course completely. If we continue to talk about all of these anecdotes, we're not going anywhere. Okay, so this isn't a question, just a comment. I just wanted to say that I was able to interview a senior responsible of the European Commission on the destruction of constructions funded by the European Union. And I was told very clearly that once you've given the funds, and once something is built, it is a Palestinian property, which means that it is no longer the property of the European Union, and it is no longer for the European Union to actually claim damages.
Very short points. One, I think this is the richest occupation in history. Without making this occupation costly, no way to change, their policies and their actions. And BDS is one way, but there is also another way. For instance, let them lose their free visa to Europe, for instance. They don't give a visa, and they ban the entry of many of the European citizens. Why the settlers and the criminals, and here I'm speaking specifically about criminals, those they commit crimes and illegal actions, why they enter and enjoy free visa to come to France and the rest of Europe? That's an issue, for instance, you can push for. Another thing is it's important also to use the academic piece of work regarding apartheid and colonialism as politicians, as parliamentarians, also to push for that, because today it was mentioned, and there is a book, I think it's a very, very thorough and precise piece of work. It's called Beyond Occupation, Colonialism and Apartheid and Occupation. This one, it's a very, very important one from academics. The other issue is, the last point I have is, I think we have to encourage parliamentarians and everyone to go to Palestine. We have to organize these visits, even for those they can make it. It's very, very important thing to see things by their eyes. And by doing, taking action against the occupation, I think we can strengthen the question in the Israeli public mind, why? What's absence in all of these things? There is no question why. And if tomorrow, if there is an election, I think Netanyahu will win again, because his message is respected and his message is accurate. We haven't lost anything. Everything, you enjoy everything now as an Israelis, and I am the one who can make all of these things continue. That's the case. How to build, the question why in the Israeli public opinion. I think this is very important, and in my mind, in my point of view, is by actions, no other way. Thank you.
S'il y a encore droit à une question, il y en a...
There's another question, but please, can I ask you to be very brief? Yes, very briefly. I went to a conference recently, and I found out that 2 young French Jews will be doing their military service in Israel. I suppose they have two nationalities, both nationalities. So is this the case for other binationals? No, 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 no. There was a convention that was signed in 1956 between France and Israel. And why? Well, if I remember correctly, it was just before the Suez War. I don't know if there's a direct link, but there was a very good relationship between both countries. And the main negotiator was Shimon Peres. Maybe you've heard of him. We cannot hear the comments that are made without using a microphone. It seems that the member of the audience is saying that there are conventions with other countries. However, the interpreters can't hear everything that is being said. The speaker says, we are not going to debate about this for a very long time. However, it seems that there's a specific status, Tosha Barai, and they do have some form of Israeli citizenship. Okay, we are not going to open this debate. Clémentine, you wanted to say something, and we will wrap up. No, I don't want to make this any longer, but I want to talk about the French and Israeli Friendship Committee. We have many of those at the National Assembly, and we need to know if we can be in this group or not. I am in this group with other colleagues, and there are pressures, and also pressures coming from the chair of this group asking us to leave this group because we are not friends and allies of Israel's and that we have nothing to do there. Once again, there's another comment from the audience that we can't hear. Apologies from the interpreters. Another important argument to remind, who must be reminded, that there are Israelis who want a durable solution and peaceful solution for the region, and they should be taken into account as well. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone.